Hi and welcome. This is Sam Collins, your coding and billing expert when it comes to acupuncture, and we're excited to bring another month of some exciting information on coding and billing and just the treatment of patients with acupuncture. And so just to give you a little update, bear in mind things are always updating and changing. Of course, doing our seminars, if you want to attend any of our billing and coding seminars, we're across the US, and simply go to our website. It's info network.com. We're all over the US. We have a location probably near you. Check our website, come on out, hear about the coding and billing, what's going on, how to make sure you're getting in payment. But also it's more than just that. We're also dealing with documentation and other issues. One quick note on some new things that are occurring. Obviously, as you're all probably aware, ICD-10 always updates in October. This October update this year is very, very minor. For those of you that have our digital coding, please note those codes have already been updated, but it's very minor compared to last year. Basically, only 4 codes made a change, and it's spinal stenosis. So frankly, I don't think you're going to see much of a difference. So don't worry, this year, not a major change, but those changes are already on our digital coding. So when you hear about the change on October 1st for ICD-10, realize we have you covered. We also will be covered at the seminar. What's also occurring and new, as many of you are aware, I am on the WHO committee for ICD-11. ICD-11, though it's not going to be in the United States at least anytime soon, does contain a chapter on traditional Chinese medicine. This new focus will allow acupuncturists to really use codes or really diagnoses that fit what you do, such as qi stagnation. I'll be going soon to Mexico City to finalize some of that. You should hear about it more in 2018 because a lot of the world will adopt it. Be aware the U.S. has no intent of adopting right away, but that's something that's moving forward. In addition, of course, you're probably aware of the opioid crisis and all that's going on there. Be aware that the FDA has now proposed and pushed that all medical providers should be giving information about alternatives or complementary care when it comes to dealing with pain management for acupuncture. So I foresee a lot of changes in movement there, as I'm sure you're aware, also a lot of care for the VA. However, today's program, we're going to deal with talking about the first cycle of life. Some people might think of this as being pediatric, but we really want to focus on that first cycle or maybe the first 7 years. And we really brought a nice expert. His name is Dr. Moshe Heller. He has a thriving practice in New York, but his focus has been on this first cycle of life or so-called pediatrics acupuncture. And we're really lucky to have him and happy to be here. So Moshe, I'll say welcome and thanks for being with us.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, well, good. We're glad to have you. Now, let me give you a little background on Moshe. This is so long. Let me sit down and read it to make sure I've got this correct. So make sure we want to bring to you people that really have some good credentials that can give you some good information on making your practice thrive. So Moshe is a graduate of the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in San Diego. He is a former academic dean and chair of the Department for Oriental Medicine at the Pacific College of New York. He has been practicing and teaching Chinese medicine for over 23 years. He taught at Hebrew University of Medicine College and the Israeli College of Complementary Medicine. He also completed a postgraduate work at the Guanam Hospital in Beijing, China, where he focused on internal medicine and TCM gynecology. So that's really exciting and shows he's really got some background and experience. And so without further ado, Moshe, I'd like to say welcome and come and tell us a little about what's going on. How do you deal with this so-called first cycle of life?
So when we talk in Chinese medicine, we have the idea that we go through cycles in life, and usually these cycles are of 7 years for females and 8 years for men. We are a little slower in developing. And each of these cycles is a developmental cycle. It's sort of like is a marker of how your jing unfolds. So when we look at the first cycle of life, it is actually a very special cycle because so many things are happening. The child's developing and things are changing very, very fast, unlike cycles later on. So this cycle is divided into further sections, so that each one of these sections we can expect or actually predict that the issues that would come would be of a certain nature. So looking at these cycles helps us to kind of understand the pathomechanisms that are going on or maybe underlying the complaint that the child is coming in with.
Okay, well, great. That's a good one. Now, when you say first cycle too, what are the common things like, because obviously it's going to be a parent that brings this child in, but what type of things do they commonly bring them in for? What type of things do you treat?
So each one of these, each one of the sub-cycles, I would say, would bring in some different issues. We're starting out with the first, usually 3 to 6 months, are a relatively quiet period in terms of major diseases. But the most common thing that comes up are things like colic and reflux, which are very, unfortunately, they do come up quite frequently, and I have many patients with that. Then once that 6 months period begins, and we move to the next cycle where new food is introduced to the child, then you have issues of more digestive issues come up, and we have a diagnosis that we use in this period of time, which is called food accumulation in adults, but we call it an accumulation disorder, which is very similar to what we might see as food stagnation in adults. Later, as they reach the age of 2, usually that we call that the febrile period. That's the time when we have more heat symptoms, a lot of colds and flus, and different what we call external pathogenic factors are very common in this period of time. And then the terrible twos, you must have heard of that period of time where the child is actually recognizing that they are separate from their environment, and they learn to say no. And that we call this period a very hot period. So having a fever is is very common. And then later on, we move into closer to from about 4 years of age to 7 or 8. That's the phase where we are starting to understand that we are a part of a community, and the issues that come up at that time have to do with kind of understanding the rules and of society. And if you are not able to do that, then things come up like having difficulties with being in a group, or understanding social cues, and or having attention, what we kind of sometimes tag as attention deficit or hyperactive disorder.
Okay, so you really are treating a wide variety of things that are just common conditions and things that I think are seen clearly in Western medicine that's often treated with medication or other things, so doing it in the more traditional sense. Now, that being said, of course, when dealing with a newborn or a young child, how do you address the parents? Because I'm sure they're bringing them in. They've probably been at their wits' end with other types, but also how do you introduce them to, do you do needling? Do you do other types of techniques?
So one thing I want to mention is one of the hardest part, and I hear that from many practitioners who, we teach a course for pediatrics, that the biggest issue that they have is not so much dealing with the kids or the babies, it's more dealing with the parents, because you're actually having them as a kind of they're the ones that are the caregivers, and you need to address them. And there's two things I want to say about that. First of all is that there's a lot of explanation that you need to take the time to kind of explain to the parents what you're doing, and that's sometimes difficult, but it is important. And the second thing is that we have a very important saying in Chinese medicine that always treat the mother to treat the child, or I would say treat the caregiver to treat the child. So you have to sort of like diagnose what we are dealing with in terms of that relationship between them, those two. And if you understand it, it's actually very, very easy to kind of unravel that and support both the parent and the child.
Okay, now that's a real important factor, of course, obviously dealing with the parent, because often that child really can't verbalize, so you have to hear what's coming from the parent. Well, I don't want to overstep. I know you have a presentation. I think what I'd like to see is the people who are viewing this a chance to understand how they might incorporate this into this practice. How might these this new cycle of life, if you will, incorporate it. I think you have a PowerPoint presentation that you can show that kind of gives an idea of that, because I certainly want to see that they can do something to incorporate this or begin to incorporate it into their own practices.
Yeah, so I am going to share the screen. 1 second. Can you see that? Is that?
Yeah, we look good. I see it. It says the first cycle of life.
Yeah, good. So what I created here is that okay. This is actually a review of what we already said, that there are cycles of life which are either 8 years in males or 7 in females, and but we are going to focus on the first cycle of life. So the thing that I wrote down here is that each one of these phases that I described to you before has an association with what we call one of the 5 elements. And we start from the water stage, which is 0 to 6 months. And in that period, the child usually, the basic issues that come around it is, who am I, is the question that arises, which means that what are the who am I in terms of this kind of world that I came into. So the diseases are not prevalent, and the main disorder that we may see are colic and reflux, like we sort of mentioned. In the second harmonic, which is the wood stage, this would be between 6 months and 18 months, and or a little older than that. And so the main issues that come up in this period of time are developing confidence, adapting to change, and preparing to move out. And so they're starting to move, they're starting to explore. And the main challenges are challenges of acclimating, and these children are more susceptible to wind as we know it, and digestive disorders, because the child is growing very rapidly, and there's a demand on the digestive system, and therefore the main issue that we see in this period are accumulation disorders. That usually are the main treatment for that condition is using the CFANG points. The next stage is the fire stage. It's anywhere between 1.5 years and 24 to 2.5 years. And here, this is again the fire period, as we mentioned, are the terrible twos, the beginning of that, and standing upright into the world, and they're starting to develop into speech at this time, and they learn the word no as we said it. And that's where we see a lot of febrile disorders. Will need to use a lot of cooling techniques to clear that heat and help the child kind of resolve the issues. The next stage is actually the earth stage. That's 2.5 to about 4.5 years of age. This is, I call this the shift from competition to collaboration, right? Instead of being on their own in the world, they have to understand how to interact with their family, with their cohort. And that is exactly what the earth resembles, right? Is incorporating and supporting and creating a family. So the challenges that come up are the ability to be cooperative in a group play and in preparation for preschool. They're very prone to poor appetite and sugar cravings, and that's why we need to really strengthen the spleen in this stage, so that to support that period of earth stage. And they are really prone to creating allergic reaction, and that still remains from the febrile period because there's still a lot of heat in there. So there's a lot of allergic reaction and a lot of heat manifesting there. And then the last stage of that period is anywhere between 4.5 till around 7, 8. This is the metal stage. This is more advanced assimilation and preparing for rules and order and sequence. That's the metal that comes in, and skill mastery. And then if there's a disharmony in that ability, then we see issues like attention deficit and hyperactive situations. And then the cycle, of course, repeats, where we go back to the water stage and so on and so forth. So that's those are the cycles that we were
Well, no, yeah. So I think obviously a parent's going to bring in. I see a theme here that obviously diet is an issue. So how do you address diet with the parents on making sure? Do you try to eliminate certain foods and reintroduce? How do you approach it?
Yes. The diet is extremely important in all this phase. It's very important to discuss diet because I think a lot of times it is the cause of this disorder. One of the things that we have to make sure is that when you see the child, if you make a diagnosis, but let's say the diagnosis that the child has phlegm, then you have to eliminate phlegm-producing foods. And so the challenge begins in educating the parent about what is a good diet that eliminate, or a damp eliminating diet. Things like eliminating dairy products and wheat products that are sometimes very difficult to kind of grasp the idea of eliminating them because they seem such a basic staple, but they are frequently the cause of the disorder. And I've had many cases where when children are put off or taken off or not given any dairy products and wheat, and then their chronic conditions like chronic ear infections, or even their ability to concentrate and focus changes because the phlegm is eliminated.
Well, I think this is something I'm sure you give a parent an understanding too, that often these chronic ear infections or the ADHD also could be, though you're making a correction, you're looking at it holistically to kind of go back to what's kind of the central cause, not treating the symptom of it, but kind of the causation. So clearly there's a lot of education that has to deal with for the parents. But one of the things we have discussed in the past, and we've talked also though, but you do also deal with things like eczema and asthma as well?
Correct, yes. And they could have the same, especially when they arise at this period of time, other than being some, of course, congenital issues that are contributing. But when they appear at this period of time, we can see that, for example, if they appear at around 6 months of age when we're introducing new foods, then definitely this could be the cause of the disease. Therefore, we need to look at what is being introduced to see if we can eliminate it and stop the pathology that's occurring. So I think that's another example where we could use diet as part of the treatment. And so in any case, when you understand the pathomechanisms or where this condition appears, then we can understand better how to treat it. So both for eczema and asthma, which are very similar disorders in terms of our the disease mechanism, right? There's a very close link between the two, can be addressed very well, I think, with doing acupuncture, giving some herbs, and teaching the parents how to eliminate some of the causing factors.
Okay, so now that brings up, when you said acupuncture, one thing I want to make sure that I hit with you is, how do you deal with a parent? Let's say that, obviously you're going to deal with diet and other things, but clearly you might have a parent, excuse me, that has a needlephobia, And this is something you definitely need to do with the child. How do you deal with a parent like that? Or if they just don't want to, how do you work with that?
So a lot of times what we have is other tools other than needles to treat children. So you don't necessarily need to use needles, especially with children, because their energy is, their chi is so much more easily affected. So you don't need to insert a needle necessarily to create the same effect. So we use tools like, or techniques like shonishin, shonishin techniques that are stimulating to the points without really doing needle insertion. And that works really well with children, because they're, as I said, their chi is so easily affected and very, we call it clear and effective, right?
Okay, so clear, you can kind of end a parent's, feeling some anxiety with the fact that, often you don't need to use needles, in fact, because you can use, like you said, the shonishin or something similar, I would assume.
Yeah, there's also an electro stimulator, or it's a cutaneous electro stimulator, where we create, I call it the tickling machine, because it creates a little tickle on the point instead of using a needle. And I use that for the older children. If they're 3 and above, I would use the cutaneous electrostimulator rather than the shonishin techniques.
Yeah, so clear, just you're stimulating the points, but not often with a needle. Now, correct. That being said, now I think that I would want to know is like, what type of outcomes do you typically get? Is how long does it take to make some effect? What can let's say I'm a parent coming in, what would be my expectations after, with the care? Is it going to take, 5 visits, 10 visits, a month, 2 months?
Right. So, of course, like any condition, it depends how chronic your situation is and how, so it's very hard to kind of give an exact number on that. But generally speaking, I expect really quick results. I believe that children respond much quicker than adults. So it's not that you're expecting tens of treatments to get the same effect for an adult, that for the same amount. You're not expecting to use the same amount of treatments for an adult and a pediatric patient. Actually, you're expecting to use less. So usually, if it's let's say if it's an ear infection, I usually expect to see results within 1 to 3 treatments at the most. I usually don't drag it very long, and the treatment needs to be also close by. So it's not like, sometimes you can see a patient, an adult patient, every other week or every week, and that should be okay. But in cases of children, you might need to see them more often. And even if I don't see them, I make sure to contact the parent to see how they're doing. So I'm not just sending them out and saying, okay, let's talk in 2 weeks. Because usually children respond quicker, and then you need to also adjust your treatment appropriately.
Okay, so that's good. So one of the things, obviously, is doing a kind of a report of findings or an explanation to the parent. So the nice thing is you do have kind of an expectation of seeing a pretty rapid result, but you can also give a parent, I would think, more of a expectation so they can see certain changes. I'll never say anyone cures something that quickly, but they should certainly see, even within a couple of visits, some positive return from that, I would assume.
Yes, that's exactly how.
Okay. Now, here's going to be the thing, though. Obviously, this is, you're practicing, you have to pay all of your bills. And you mentioned, as we discussed, that you don't belong to any insurance type of contracts. So clearly, obviously, the patients are paying cash for you. But you also mentioned, though, that, you do have patients that will take this and will bill insurance as well. You give them a super bill, I'm assuming?
Actually, if they want a super bill, I provide them with the super bill. But I usually have my own biller. So if they have coverage, I do all the billing for them.
Okay, so in other words, when they do have coverage, and I think that's important, that they can have some pretty good coverage, and be aware, for those that are listening, that there are some plans that do cover many more things than you might think, particularly with asthma and some of these other conditions. for acupuncture. It's just a matter of verifying with the plan. So what plans have you found, you know, and obviously you're in New York, but what plans have you found that you would say cover it more typically than say another?
I think that there are a few plans out there that I'm not sure about their names, but I know that that Blue Cross Blue Shield has one that covers acupuncture, and I have a few Blue Cross Blue Shield patients that have coverage. And by the way, you're the expert in insurance, so you probably know that even though I have two patients with the same plan or the same big plan, sometimes the smaller or fine print, I would call them, has a difference. So I have two patients with Cigna, and they have the same, it's called open access or something like that. But when we call, one of them has acupuncture and the other one doesn't.
Well, that's an important point to bring up. In fact, in your area, I would say certainly Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield, I would anticipate likely more coverage, as well as Horizon if you're in the New Jersey area at all. But for instance, when you mentioned that Cigna, you know, like an open access, unfortunately, Cigna and Blue Cross are very large companies. And they sell a plan and you think, oh, they have Cigna, but Cigna literally sells hundreds of plans. So depending on who you work for, so if you work for company A and someone company B, it's different. So one of the ways to know that is not by saying open access, but looking at and see what is the plan number. So if you have two different people that have Cigna open access, look at the plan number. Those will be different and will tell you that there's going to be different coverage. But certainly Cigna can have pretty good one. Now, the area I want to focus on is, though, clearly you attempt to make sure that the patients can, if they have coverage, it can be covered. If it doesn't, they pay cash. And I think that that's clear that certainly a patient that is bringing a child wants them to get help. I don't think you find them too unwilling to pay your rate, obviously, because they're bringing their child in for a reason. But of course, if the insurance can help to reimburse, that certainly doesn't hurt.
Right. Plus, I do have what I call a pediatric rate because of them needing to have more frequent treatments, and so I have a pediatric pay rate, which helps sometimes for, you know.
Well, and I think certainly too, you mentioned that pediatrics don't always get needling, so certainly then the coding of those things would be slightly different as well. I think the takeaway here is that, again, what makes a successful practice, what makes your practice successful, is treating patients and making sure patients are aware of the types of conditions. Because unfortunately, I think you've probably found it. Do you find many times people are completely unaware where acupuncture can help this? And how do you kind of market or get people to know that you can help them with this problem?
You know, I think that the way to market, of course, is I think the best way is word to mouth, right? That's the best marketing. So I think that a lot of my patients bring me more patients. But you know, nowadays it's a little different. You need to have some kind of a social media access and to put your word out. And I think doing blogs and things like that always help to give out information about how to treat pediatric patients. Those are things that help bring more
well,
of them
certainly
in.
word of mouth, like you said, social media. But I think the clear picture is, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to bring this type of program today, is to make sure that you can open your practice to treating. I mean, we treat human beings, and they can be young or old. And a lot of times persons are looking for something that's different because they've tried lots of things that with, you know, very little success for the most part. And if you can give them a little bit of help, I think that's helpful. And I like that you saying, hey, I do a little bit of both. When you have coverage, we'll take it. When you don't have coverage, oh, well, you pay cash for it. And like you said, you have them with a little bit of a rate that's different because since it's pediatric.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased with the information. I think this is something that hopefully our members and people watching can kind of start to take hold of. Now, how might is there any way for them to get hold of you, or is there some publications you have that might be helpful for them to learn more about this if they're not that familiar?
So two things. One is, for the general public, I invite them to visit my website, which is helleracupuncture.com. And for the practitioners around, and I think that's where we're trying to reach, I have a course for pediatric acupuncture that is it's a a yearly course, and it's called Jinshin Pediatric Certification Course, and it certifies you to become a pediatric acupuncturist. And if you want more information on that, we have a Facebook page. So you go to facebook.com/Jingshen Pediatrics.
Oh, that's great. So this is a place where they can certainly start getting some access to it. Well, I'm very pleased that you took the time out. I appreciate your knowledge. I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I want to make sure that others out there start thinking, okay, to grow my practice, you want to start to grow to treat beyond just a focus, but treating kind of the whole family, that it's not going to be limited to the older adult that's having pain. So again, I want to remind everyone to come back with us every month. Don't forget, take a look at our website, aacinfonetwork.com. We have seminars all over. We have our digital coding. We want to make sure that you're successful. That's really our role. We love acupuncture. We think, obviously, it does wonderful things for many people. We just have to give them access. So, Dr. Heller, I really appreciate your time with us today, and I look forward to some things in the future with you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.